Chapter 32. The Climb for Answers. Sim and Leo ran to the house to find Merek standing on the front porch waiting for them.
"What's going on?"
asked Merek, opening the door for Leo and Sim as they ran inside. Dublin jumped up from the couch in the living room and hurried over to greet everyone.
"The whole district thinks I know the way home,"
said Sim, hurrying up the stairs.
"Wait, you do?"
asked Merek.
"No, Otto just told them I did."
Sim replied from the balcony.
"Wait. Otto?"
Otto's the one leading them. He thinks Sem knows the way home, and he's turned everyone against him, trying to force the truth out of him,"
said Leo.
Hey, Otto's with the rioters now?
Merek repeated, clearly struggling to make sense of everything.
"He betrayed all of us,"
shouted Sim from his room. Merek placed both his hands up to his temples and shook his head.
Whoa, wait, back up. Otto is convinced Sem knows the way home and is using the rioters to force it out of him?
Sim grabbed his blue scarf and his light brown jacket from his closet and ran back toward the door of his room. He stopped in the doorway and looked down at the photo of himself, Arya, and Erland together on his nightstand. He picked up the frame and pulled the back off. He removed the picture from the frame and tucked it into the leather journal he still held in his hand, knowing he may need it to help find his lost friend.
"Merek, I need you to start the arc for me,"
said Sim, putting his jacket on and hurrying down the stairs. He tucked the journal into his jacket pocket, then leapt over the railing as he reached the bottom of the stairs and hurried to the basement. Merek and Leo chased after him with Dublin trailing behind.
You don't have any calls, though, and no offense, Sim, but I don't think now's the time to be taking on a rescue.
"I need to find Erland,"
said Sim, hurrying to his locker.
Sem? He's been dead for 2 years,"
said Leo, stopping at the stair landing.
No, he's out there somehow. I've seen him in every world I've visited recently.
Merek pushed past Leo.
Now Erland's alive, too. Jesus, does this rabbit hole ever reach the bottom?
"Leo, gather up all the books and blueprints from the library and store them somewhere safe,"
said Sim, connecting his communicator to the computer.
"Why?"
"We need to make sure no one gets their hands on the Ark or anything about it if they break in, especially Otto. Those documents are more important than the Ark itself. Once you're done, call Vila and warn her about what's happening. Then keep an eye out front. Whatever you do, don't let them inside the house."
Leo nodded to Sim and ran back up the stairs with Dublin chasing after him. Sim typed on the keyboard, trying to hurry as fast as he could. Merek looked at Sim while standing at his side.
So, do you really know the way home?
Sim looked over at him, sensing the heartbreak in his voice.
"No, maybe. I don't know, Merek."
So you could have sent me home to my brother this whole time?
"I don't know, Merek. I'm trying to make as much sense of this as I can,"
Sim replied, looking down at the keyboard. Merek stood silently, expressing an uncertain look of what to make of his longtime friend. Sim looked back to see Merek's wavering expression. He sighed and rested his hands on the desk. He placed a hand on Merek's shoulder.
"I'm sorry, Merek. I know you've wanted to get back to your brother for a long time, and if I knew how to send you home, I would have done it a long time ago. But if Otto is right and I've known how to get everyone home this whole time, Erland is the only one who can remind me. So, I need your help now more than ever."
Merek rubbed his forehead with a conflicted expression.
All right. What do you need me to do?
Sim unplugged his communicator and patted Merek on the shoulders.
"Thank you. Now, I need you to patch the Ark into any signal you can find. It doesn't matter which one, just get me a world I can get into."
Merek sat down in the desk chair. Sim hurried over to his locker and pulled his goggles out.
The system is still confusing to me, but I think I'm getting the hang of it. If I was here when this thing was built, I would probably have a better understanding.
"Just do your best. I have faith in you."
Sim slipped the goggles down over his eyes.
Okay, I think I found one. You'll have only an hour 15, maybe less. It's a stable world, so it's going to want you out pretty quick.
I won't be there that long.
You ready?
Hit it.
Sim replied, wrapping the scarf around his neck and stepping back into his stance. Sim watched the rings of the arc start to spin as the arms began to extend. Merek grabbed Otto's goggles off the desk. He held them for a moment, in hesitation. Merek slipped the goggles on over his head. The doorway slowly began to open. Sim could feel the cold chill of the frigid air blowing through the gateway and into the basement. The air had already begun to bite away at his exposed skin. He pulled the scarf up to cover his nose and mouth. Sim's sprint through the gateway was slowed by the sudden sense of deep packs of snow at his feet. He stepped back and pulled his goggles off to discover the edge of a cliff a few feet before him. Another 3 feet, and he would have fallen down the rocky slope. He looked up into the misty, snow-blown mountains surrounding him, feeling the hostile world around him enraged by his very existence. His communicator beeped as the arc closed behind him. Sim pressed the communicator accept button and lifted the communicator to his mouth.
You make it okay?
Asked Merek over the communicator.
You could have picked a better spot!
Shouted Sim.
Where are you?
In the mountains somewhere!
You want to come back and find another world?
No! There's no time! This will have to do!
Shouted Sim, struggling to hear through the wind howling around him.
All right, I'll call you again in 15 minutes. And hurry!
The communication ended, leaving Sim alone on his own. He scanned the surrounding cliffside, searching for any sign of life in the freezing air. There were no lights or signs of life in any direction. He only hoped he wasn't the only one on the mountain. The cliff's edge behind him transitioned to a much smoother uphill slope only a few feet above. Sim worked his way along the ledge, trying his best not to slip or be blown away in the fierce winds. His hands already felt cold and numb as he clung to the rocky cliff face. His wet, heavy breath was already beginning to turn his warm face mask into a frozen, icy cloth. Allie could no longer see Otto standing among the crowd as she stood her ground with Roz. The ferocious herd of people bashed into the shield wall of soldiers, trying their best to break their line.
Ho!
Shouted Roz to his men.
If any one of you lets a single one of those apes past, I'll have you court-martialed!
Allie scanned the line of men, seeing them being forced back inch by inch. Roz's radio buzzed. He grabbed his radio from his belt and lifted it up to shout.
What?
Delta 2 reporting in. Your reinforcements have arrived, Command 1. Where do you want us?
Asked a voice over the radio.
Damn it! We need to get to higher ground. I can't see a damn thing down here.
Roz grumbled. Allie looked up and scanned the rooftops above. She spotted the building where she had watched the bridge explosion with Vila, as well as the shop with the stairs still vacant behind her.
I know a place, come on.
She said, pulling Roz toward the shops. Allie kicked open the door to the shop. She raced up the stairs with Roz right behind her. They crossed along the roof and stopped at the edge of the building, watching the line of soldiers below them try to push the angry crowd back.
Will this work?
Perfect,
said Roz, lifting the radio to his mouth.
Delta 2, I need you to form up at Crichton Park. Don't let them reach Venice Drive. Protect the Guardian home at all costs. If they get past you, send a squad to force them back into the herd. Do you copy?
Copy that, Command 1. Proceeding to Crichton Park.
Roz grunted and put the radio down at his side. He looked out over the tops of the buildings to see the crowd spread out.
I hope your boyfriend has a good plan. Otherwise, we might be stranded on a sinking ship without a captain.
Allie looked over at Roz, then back down at the streets below.
So do I.
Sim wiped the snow away from his goggles and gazed down at his wrist. The fierce howling of the wind echoed around him as it blasted through his thin, layered jacket. Each high-pitched beep of his wrist communicator bounced across the rocky mountainside. Sim lifted the frozen communicator to his face. The words on the screen were now blurred and illegible through a layer of frost. The wind bit at his skin as he pulled the scarf away from his mouth. He blew at the screen, hoping to defrost the display. The communicator read, "Message from Otto. Accept or decline." Sim wiped the melted snow from the communicator and pressed the accept button with his numb, gloveless hand.
Yeah?
Hey, have you found him yet?
Asked Merek, sitting just inches from the computer. He tapped his foot on the basement floor nervously. Sim took a deep breath of the brisk mountain air. The thin atmosphere barely filled his lungs as he struggled to take in each dry breath.
No!
Replied Sim, breathing heavily.
But he's here!
Sim scanned the horizon while standing on the jagged mountain face. Above, he saw another long climb of sheer, icy rock. He contemplated turning back and searching for somewhere else to climb. Sim looked down at his boots and noticed an iron climbing piton partially buried in the snow. He reached down and picked it up. It was brand new with no sign of rust. He held it in the palm of his hand and felt the lack of frost on its gray metallic surface.
I know he's here.
Sim said into his communicator, dropping the piton back down into the snow.
You're running out of time. You need to find him and get back here before the arc closes on you.
Sim shook the snow from his hands. A worried weight continued to fall over him. His arms felt numb. His legs were tired. With each blast of the wind, he wished desperately that he had brought more than a light jacket and scarf. But he had no time to waste. His friends needed him now, more than ever, especially Allie.
How much time do I have?
Merek heard the door upstairs open, accompanied by the distant, muffled roar of an angry crowd outside. The silence returned as the door slammed shut and panicked footsteps hurried down the stairs towards him. Merek glanced back over his shoulder to see Leo rush over to him and place his hands on the desk as he bent down to catch his breath.
They're at least 3 blocks away. They've already destroyed everything from West Cross to Creighton Park. It's madness out there.
Merek looked back at the screen. The seconds on the clock at the top of the screen ticked away. The milliseconds flashed by. He keyed up the mic in front of him.
You have at least 45 minutes left. We might have less than that.
Sim willed himself to let go of his worries. The longer he stood by catching his breath, the more time he wasted, and the sooner he would freeze to death. Sim lifted the scarf back up over his nose and mouth. He reached up and grabbed the pointed ledge above him, beginning the deadly climb.
Have they found a way to slow them down?
Sim shouted into the communicator through his dark blue scarf as it flapped in the wind. Leo leaned forward over Merek's shoulder and grabbed the microphone.
They're trying, but no one's listening anymore. We need you back here now!
Merek yanked the microphone back from Leo and placed it down on the desk in front of him again.
We're doing all we can, Sim.
Sim reached up for the next ledge, barely able to hear Merek's voice over the frigid storm.
Are you sure he's out there? You could have just imagined him.
No. He's here, Merek. I'll find him. I have to find him.
Sim tightened his grip as best he could. Leo lowered his head, still straining to catch his breath. Merek looked to his right. He watched the metal rings of the arc gently spin in a circle around the small, bright white starlight at the center.
I hope you're right,
said Merek as he gazed at the arc, terrified for his life. Sim reached for the next ledge, continuing his climb for answers. Sim felt a slight trembling in the rock beneath his fingertips. His eyes grew wide under his goggles at the terrifying sound of a thunderous echo looming above him. His nerves shattered to pieces. He turned his gaze upward. A massive wall of snow and ice now plummeted down towards him. He held onto the ledge for dear life, pulling himself close to the wall. Sim yelled into his communicator as the mountain brushed him away, forcing him to release his grip. Leo and Merek could hear their friends cry over the computer speakers. They stared at each other with the same sinking feeling. The speakers fell silent as an unsettling tension filled the room.
Sam! Sam!
Yelled Merek, tapping anxiously on the keyboard. The screen flashed an error message as the connection went dead. Grabbing the mouse and clicking wildly across the screen, Merek desperately tried to get the call back.
What happened?
I don't know! Sam! Sam, are you there?
Shouted Merek into the microphone. Sem's black communicator rested in the snow, still clasped to his wrist. His arms stuck out from the densely packed snow, frigid and lifeless. His communicator beeped as the sound echoed through the mountain air with the same message displayed on the screen. Message from Otto. Accept or decline. The beeping continued, calling out across the empty mountainside with no response from the fallen savior of worlds. Allie searched through the crowd, trying to spot Otto mixed in with the mass of people still forcing their way up the street. He had disappeared, no doubt falling back to make his own plans. Roz and Allie heard the door to the store below open and close. They turned around to see Vila running over to them from the rooftop doorway.
What's going on? Leo said something about Otto, the riot and you guys needing help, and then he hung up. But the poor lad sounded like he'd lost his wits.
Vila stopped next to Allie and looked down at the crowd below.
That Judas priest Otto has been playing us. He's joined the rioters trying to force a confession out of Sem about a way to send everyone home,
said Roz, glaring out over the battle unfolding.
He did what?
Otto found an old journal of Erland's saying Sem knows the way to get everyone home. Now Otto's convinced he's been lying to everyone and is using the whole city to try and force it out of him,
said Allie.
Where is Sem now?
Ran off. He's back at the house, planning a counterattack, I hope,
replied Roz to Vila, watching a small group of people break through the line. Roz shouted into his radio.
Charlie 1, send out a squadron and stop those monkeys right now!
I'm sure he has a plan, dear. We can always count on him to come through.
Vila wrapped an arm around Allie. Allie continued to watch with a rising feeling of dread.
No doubt. At this rate, they're going to swarm up on the Ark house within the hour. My men can only do so much without force. My orders from the council are not to hurt anyone, or we'll be waist deep in a political mess across the other islands.
Why aren't they helping us?
They've all abstained from a vote to intervene, not wanting to drag the other islands into the fight. They left the decision to help in my hands, but they won't lift a finger in support.
Vila shook her head in disappointment. Allie felt a quake of hatred roll through her. Not only had Sem's best friend now betrayed him, and his own people turned against him, but the council who watched over him had abandoned him as well.
Get back to the house and prepare to barricade the door. I'll stay here and see this thing through to the end.
Allie put a hand on Roz's arm, thankful to see at least one of Sem's unexpected friends was still watching their backs. Vila hurried back to the stairs with Allie trailing after her. Roz picked up his radio, ready to shout more orders.
Bravo 1, be ready to meet back at the Guardian home. Alpha, shift over to meet up with Delta along Venice Street.
The faint smell of tea wafted into Sem's nose. His hands and arms were still wet and freezing, but he could feel warmth building around him under a thick wool blanket draped over him. He slowly opened his eyes as the droplets of water from the ceiling landed on his face. He reached up and wiped the droplets from his cheek. He caught the warm, blurred glow of a gas lamp as he rubbed at his eyes. He blinked repeatedly, trying to clear his vision. Around the gas lamp lay a pair of red sleeping bags and a climber's pack next to a small pot of boiling water over a camping stove. The pot billowed with a soothing tea smell. Surrounding him was a small cave covered in a thick sheet of ice across each wall. The snow continued to blow in the howling wind outside the cave entrance. a short Tibetan man dressed in a thick wool jacket and climbing goggles walked into the cave carrying a heavy bundle of rope and climbing pick. He pulled the goggles down from over his eyes with one hand and smiled at Sim.
还活着吗？再这样下去，你就会成为一块冰了。很高兴看到你没事。
asked the man, briefly bowing to Sim as he carried the rope and a climbing pick to the back of the cave. Sim nodded, unsure of what he had said. The climber gave a joyful grin and placed the rope and climbing pick down on the floor of the cave. He chuckled, seeing Sim had no idea what he had said. Sim looked over at the entrance of the cave once more in confusion. Another man with a thick gray beard, covered head to toe in snow, walked into the cave. Sim felt a fleeting sense of relief, seeing the man's pale blue eyes the moment he lifted the goggles away from his eyes. It was Erland.
Beautiful weather out there,
said Erland, shaking the snow off his shoulders.
How you feeling, kid?
Fine, I think,
said Sim, scooting up under his blanket to get more comfortable.
Told you to wear something warm,
said Erland, embedding his climbing pick into the thick layer of ice in the wall.
他会说普通话吗？或者不，他不会说普通话。
The climber asked Sim. Sim looked at him, with no clue what he had asked. He reached down to pull his earpiece out from his communicator, only to discover he had lost it in the avalanche. He looked over to Erland for a moment. Erland laughed and turned to the man.
Oh, we know.
Erland replied to the climber in a foreign tongue. The climber laughed and looked at Sim with a playful grin of mockery. Sim sat with a confused look.
Good. I'd like you to meet Dilawar, a good friend of mine,
said Erland. Dilawar bowed to Sim with a humble greeting. Sim lowered his head, trying to return the gesture, still utterly confused as to what was going on. Dilawar turned around and removed his thick jacket and placed it over his backpack.
A friend?
Questioned Sim. Erland removed his heavy jacket and hung it up on the climbing pick buried in the wall.
Dilawar and I met when I first moved to his village many years ago, looking to explore and seek out my one and only purpose in this world. We've become good friends since then, exploring many of these unexplored mountains, all the while waiting for you.
Erland bent down and grabbed the warm teapot off the stove, pouring its contents into a tin cup sitting on the wet ground at his feet.
Here, drink some tea. Warm your insides.
Erland handed Sim the warm cup.
How have you known him for that long? You told me you grew up in Australia.
Erland poured the tea into another cup and handed it to Dilawar. Dilawar nodded in gratitude. He poured another cup for himself, then placed the teapot on the cave floor, allowing the stove fire to help warm the frigid air. Erland sat down on his red sleeping bag and held his tea close to his chest. Erland sipped his tea and closed his eyes with a silent moment of enjoyment.
Warm tea is great for the body and even better for the spirit. You can't beat a good bottle of brandy, though.
I thought you were dead,
said Sim, leaning forward.
I am dead,
said Erland, placing his cup on the icy cave floor next to him.
Then how are you here?
Erland took a heavy breath and scratched at the ice in his beard.
I guess it's that time.
Dilawar closed his eyes and began meditating as he drank his tea near the back of the cave. Erland cleared his throat.
The day I left you and Daria, I never planned to leave you both. The last call I went on seemed normal enough, but as soon as I arrived, I realized it was much more than I could take. What awaited me on the other side of the ark caught me off guard. I hit as close to the bullseye as possible, kid. All by a stroke of sheer luck and coincidence, I suppose. The world I arrived in was my own, 15 miles outside of my hometown growing up. Torn between a chance to see myself and my wife when we were just young kids starting out our lives together, or finding the traveler, I chose to take a personal vacation to revisit my own past. I figured I had enough time, since there was 7 hours left to find the traveler and get back. But for the first time, I had forgotten my own rules. I took the train to my hometown, Melbourne, and walked back to the first apartment I'd owned with my wife. I followed myself and my wife around town as we went out on our usual Friday evening outings to the farmer's market, shop after shop. I watched from afar. I laughed at how young and naive I was, still in school, ready to become a free thinker in a growing world, thinking I had the life figured out. The hours started to tick by, and I kept pushing my deadline further and further along. Before I knew it, I only had 2 hours remaining. Realizing my mistake, I waited at the train station checking my watch, praying I could make it back in time to find out who I was looking for, and to return to you both. But by the time the train arrived at the station, my time was almost up. Figuring I could at least make it back, I arrived at the gateway and stopped in my tracks. I couldn't bear to leave. I had selfishly doomed an entire world. My own actions had ruined the lives of countless others. By my selfishness, I had destroyed my own world and murdered myself and my wife. Had I not just done what I swore my life to do and upheld my own duties as a guardian, I would have allowed at least one version of myself the chance to live a happy life. So I stayed. I stood at the Ark and never took that final step. I chose to face my fate along with everyone else's as punishment for my own crime.
Sim held his cup in sorrow, his mind whirling in shock.
You just left us. You left me. You left Arya.
I'm sorry, kid.
Erland's eyes were fixed on the fire ahead of him, his whole face stricken with guilt.
I don't ever expect you to forgive me. I not only hurt everyone from my own past, but I know I hurt you and Arya the most. My only future, too.
Sim set the cup down on the floor.
No,
said Sim, compassion flooding his voice.
I do forgive you.
Erland looked over at him.
I've been selfish these past few years, thinking everyone needed to just let go of their past lives and learn to live in the present. I never understood how much a home meant to people because I never had one as a child. I understand why you stayed now. It was a brave and humble thing to do, and I forgive you for it.
You've changed in the past 2 years, kid,
said Erland with a smile. Sim smiled back at him. He looked down at his teacup, took a sip, and readied himself to ask his next question.
So if you stayed, how are you still here?
The Ark is a mystery, even for me, kid. I created it, but failed to understand its true potential. It has the power to reach across vast oceans of worlds or delve into the heart of creation. as well as to bend time and space to its will.
Erland took another drink of his tea and looked over at Deliwer. Deliwer continued to sit quietly, meditating.
When I stayed, and another world of my own was destroyed, I learned that I was still bound to the Ark by a thin thread. It holds onto us guardians by an invisible tether, looking after us even though we never knew it. When the world collapsed all around me, I stayed bound to the Ark, a prisoner to its own infinite link across worlds. As the Ark connects itself to each world in danger, I became woven at a time, like another strand of yarn being added to a tapestry. It allows me to see and remember my own past, live in every present, and even predict and witness my own future.
Sem sat back, eyes wide.
So, that's why you've always been there when we needed help.
Erland drank his tea and nodded.
Now, for example, Delawaer and I have been planning this trip for the past 5 years. I told him we'd find a man buried in the snow up in the mountains, and he bet me 10,000 rupees I would be wrong. Cheers, mate.
Erland lifted his teacup to Deliwer in a toast. Deliwer shook his head at him, pretending to still meditate as he ignored him with a grudging look.
Otto found your journal in the library.
Sem leaned forward to catch the warmth from the fire.
Did he now? I'll take a wild guess that he's now leading all those angry people who want to go home in a rally against you. Am I right?
Sem raised an eyebrow.
Yeah, how did you...
I told you, kid, I'm dead. But I'm still woven into every world, even Asphodel. As much as I'd like to be there.
Erland waved his hand over the fire.
He's convinced I know the way to get everyone home.
Sem dug through his pocket to find the journal. He pulled his photo out from the cover and handed the journal to Erland over the teapot.
I haven't seen this in ages.
Erland replied, rubbing his hand across the leather cover.
You wrote something about giving Arya and I the key to sending everyone home.
Erland opened the journal and read through the pages, smiling to himself.
Otto was always a quick thinker, never paying enough close attention. He misses important details most of the time.
He handed the book back to Sem with a page turned open to the entry. Sem began to read. He scanned the page word for word, not sure what he was supposed to see.
What about it?
Asked Sem, pointing at the page.
Through all my endeavors and failures, successes and mistakes, at least I can give the greatest gift to Sem and Arya that a father and teacher can offer. A way home.
Quoted Erland. Sem continued to look at him in confusion. Erland shook his head, laughing.
Maybe you should write more specifically next time,
argued Sem.
Yeah. Look in your other hand.
Sem looked down and saw he was still holding the photograph. Looking at it brought a warmth to his heart that the fire never could. The memory of the only family he'd ever had.
I said a way home, not the way home.
Sem looked down at the journal again, noticing the one-word difference.
Researching the Ark and trying to find a way home led me to the sudden realization that maybe I never would find a way back. And that was when I chose to start the Guardian Project.
So you trained me and Arya?
Yeah. Not only to save people, but to help others cope with having been dragged from their homes with very little chance of returning. I chose you and Arya because you both saw Asphodel as your home. You made it your home. You weren't born into it like others or at an age when you could never let go. So you made it your home. The way home I gave you was another way to live. I burdened you with the heaviest weight of all, comforting others who suffered the same great loss, who hadn't yet made their peace with it.
Sim looked at the photo again. He felt daft for never realizing this before. All those days he had spent with Arya, out walking through the wondrous world they called home, taking in the people and culture around them, was Erland's way of teaching them to find comfort in their new home. Across the vast bridges and painted skies, life and love blossomed. Sim laughed.
Well, you could have written that rather than talking in riddles. You would have saved me a lot of heartache.
Sorry. Didn't think a group of angry travelers would take me so literally.
So, there's no way home then? You never found it?
Asked Sim. Erland took another deep breath and finished off the rest of his tea.
Hand me the photo,
said Erland, pouring the small amount of tea left from the pot into his cup. Sim handed him the photo. Erland pulled a pen out from his backpack and began writing on the back of it. He handed the photo back to Sim. Written on the back was now a series of numbers he had never seen before.
What's this?
It's not the way home, but it is a way.
What do you mean?
That's part of the discovery that led me to start the Guardian Project with you two in the first place. The only way I ever found. That equation is a one-way ticket home. A single trip. For one person. Only one time.
Sim looked up at him.
Only one?
If you use it, the Ark loses its connection to the worlds around it. Whoever steps in will be sent home, while everyone else will be left stranded in Asphodel forever. Bound to one life for across all eternity.
You solved the reference problem?
Not solved. Just found another way for it to work. That equation made me realize that I needed to work on helping people see Asphodel as a new home, rather than letting them cling to the past. I almost used it myself once or twice, but I couldn't imagine living with the guilt of leaving you and Arya behind and dooming all those worlds.
What am I supposed to do with it then?
Hey, you asked me if I knew a way, kid. That's one, but it's not the right way.
Erland stood up from his sleeping bag.
I'll leave it up to you to decide what you do with it. No, I'd say your time's just about up.
Sim slipped the photo back into the journal and stood up. He dropped the blanket on the ground and looked over at Deliver, still sitting with his eyes closed.
I think he fell asleep.
I don't blame him. You put me to sleep with your long lectures too.
Looks like you only have a few minutes left, kid. Best hurry back. Our friends are still counting on you. Especially Allie.
Said Erland, walking over to the cave entrance. Sim's heart ached at the thought of returning with his recent news. He still had no way home for everyone, only a way for a single person to return. One which would jeopardize everyone else's chances of ever getting back.
You know, you're rather a wise young man for your age. Almost too wise,
said Erland, putting his hand on Sim's shoulder.
Your father would be proud of you, kid.
I know he is,
said Sim, looking at Erland as the only father he could have ever wanted in his life. Erland pulled him in close and embraced him in his arms.
Now, go. You have a job to do.
Erland said, stepping back.
It might seem like an impossible job, but if you don't do it, no one else will. No life and no world should go drifting into darkness alone. Even our world.
Sim stepped out into the snow and reached up to slip his goggles back on over his eyes. He hesitated, realizing he still had one more question to ask.
What happened to Arya?
Erland smiled at him.
Another question for another time, kid.
Sim took a breath of the thin mountain air and tried to focus his mind on the task ahead of him, even as he felt unsatisfied with Erland's answer, but knew he had no time to argue with him. Sim pulled the goggles over his eyes and wrapped his scarf around his nose again. He looked at Erland one last time, then stepped out into the frozen, mountainous wasteland, ready to face his own future.
Hey everyone, this is James Smillie, the voice of Erland from Sam, Adventures Across Time. If you've enjoyed your adventure across time so far, be sure to check out our Patreon page at patreon.com/TS Wieland. With your support, you'll gain early access to the next chapter of the book and even a copy of the book itself. With your contribution, more thrilling and inspiring audiobooks can be made every day through the hard work, time, and dedication of voice actors and artists all across the world, including myself, all working together. From all of us here in the world between worlds, we'd like to thank you for joining us on our adventures.